it is time to get into the games that we care about most, and that means that we must start with what ended up being the wildest game of Week 8 Sunday slate. Jets 39, Bengals 38. We're not going to talk about the Bengals here to start because, as always, we start with the winners of these games. First of all, Chris, I think we have to give two shout-outs here. Number one, just shout out to the Jets as a whole. Aaron Glenn gets his first win, but also the entire franchise for getting the first win of the season on a day where it was announced that franchise legend center Nick Mangold passed away at 41. Rest in peace. Thoughts to his family. That was just obviously, it was good to, I saw Dan Hansis, who's a Jets fan, tweeting about this. You can think about tanking and draft picks and all that. Sometimes you just want to see your team win a football game, especially when you get news like that on a Sunday morning. But also, special shout out to Justin Fields as well for putting this game out there. And look, Justin Fields is not the most important player that, on the field today. We'll talk about the guy who absolutely dominated this game, but Fields getting this win after he was likely to be benched this week if Tyrod Taylor had been healthy, and his team owner went out and made the statements that he did, which as we're showing the graphic here. It's hard when you have a quarterback with the rating that we've got. If you look at any head coach with a quarterback like that, you're going to see similar results across the league. I've never seen a team owner in the middle of the season throw a player under the bus quite that hard. So shout out to Justin Fields for going out and getting this win.
Yeah, and I guess a bit of trivia for me personally. So Nick Mangold, he comes from Centerville, Ohio, and I grew up in Beaver Creek, Ohio, which is like a small town in Dayton. I actually played against Nick Mangold back in high school. So I'm a year older than Mangold was when he passed. He went to Alter High School, and there's a big rivalry between my high school, Carroll, and his. So played against him. He was much larger human than I am. I mean, I'm all over 5'9", a buck. I was maybe a buck 05 back in high school. Yeah. So, but shouts out to him. And also, a tough loss. And also very sad to see that he's now gone. And of course, for the Jets offense as a whole, and seeing them kind of rally behind like this, and also Justin Fields throughout the week after, those comments, and really just the way Justin Fields, he carried himself after a lot of those comments. Just trying to essentially push it all to the side, putting a lot of his trust in his faith in God and all of that to say that this is how he's going to try and operate as the leader for this team. And really, he came out and showed that with his trust in Aaron Glenn, also the trust in Tanner Engstrand, and calling such a solid game against this porous Bengals defense. So hats off to him for the way they're able to perform today.
Yeah, no question about it. And you mentioned Tanner Engstrand. I do think I continue to say this passing game is well designed. Like, there are spots here. So if the quarterback can just find it, I think that there are spots available in this passing game. When they've had these good moments, it's just been against some pretty bad defenses, including Cincinnati. That's one thing when we talk about this game and the next game, when we get to the Houston Texans game, where I think we need to be careful about extrapolating some of this because of the opponents that they were facing. Obviously, though, the Jets still got it done against this defense. Breece Hall was the guy that he was the straw that stirred the drink in this one here. Monster game from Breece Hall with 133 yards on the ground, 2 rushing touchdowns, 2 for 14 as a receiver, and the game-winning touchdown pass to Mason Taylor. So, shout out to Breece Hall for doing prime LaDainian Tomlinson stuff, multiple rushing touchdowns, and throwing a damn touchdown pass.
Yeah, just 4 attempts for Breece Hall where he was contacted at or behind the line of scrimmage with just 72% of the team's rushing attempts. He really was putting the team on his back in terms of being able to put them in those advantageous situations and allowing them to pull ahead, at least keep in line with the Bengals, and of course, ultimately pull ahead. So it's between him and Isaiah Davis. This rushing attack, I know they're not going to be able to face a rush defense like Cincinnati's week in and week out, but the fact that they have juice from not just one, but 2 of their running backs, let's push aside the trade rumors for Breece Hall. If this is going to be their 1-2 punch with Justin Fields also potentially operating better as a passer, and of course we know his ability as a runner as well. This could be you could see the theory, you can understand the idea behind the Jets signing them and what they can do with this offense. So maybe if they add a little bit more receiver talent around him, you could really start to see how this could come together at some point down the line. But I don't know if it's going to be this season or maybe in 2026, but still, the parts and pieces are there with the core that they have right now on offense.
43% of the snaps for Isaiah Davis, who you mentioned there, 12 touches to 21 for Hall, and he also cleared 100 yards from scrimmage with 109. So again, to me, like when we're talking about projecting this forward, and you mentioned some of the component parts are here, I do hear you. Look, like this whole thing will look better when Garrett Wilson's out there, obviously. Like this is incredible to get this win when no receiver really pops off here, which of course, like none of these guys are big time target earners, but they go on a bye in week 9, then they come back and they get the Browns and the Patriots right after that. And those are 2 run defenses that are on the complete other end of the spectrum in terms of what Cincinnati's bringing to the table here. So I don't know if I want to call this like a sell high moment for Breece Hall, both for the Jets and for fantasy managers, but I do kind of struggle to see this repeating itself once they get off that week 9 bye.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think the opportunity will be there, and hopefully with how successful they were. I mean, 67% rushing success rate for Breece Hall, and also how often Fields was able to pick up yards on the ground with his legs. There might be some parts and pieces from the concepts and plays that Engstrom was calling that they can try and use this as a blueprint for how they can get this offense to really start to churn once they have Garrett Wilson back in the lineup.
Yeah, I like what your points about just the parts and pieces of the offensive design and stuff like that. And to Aaron Glenn's credit, he was much more aggressive and in tune with the game in terms of 4th down decision makings. He made the right call in terms of going for 2 at one point in this game. So that was a nice step forward for Aaron Glenn and what's been a very, very rocky first season from him. Flipping to the other side of the ball here, I'm just going to toss this to you. What did you see from the Bengals in a game where they scored 38 points? Like the offense, I think for the most, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it felt like to me like the offense mostly did its job here.
Yeah, but that's the way that 2024 shook out for the Cincinnati Bengals. It was the offense really trying to get enough points so that the defense couldn't screw things up for them in the end. And nothing's really changed here in 2025, regardless of who's under center, if it's Joe Burrow or Joe Flacco. The one thing that I would say stood out for this game was Chase Brown essentially being back in our fantasy good graces. I mean, 57% of the rushing attempts went to Chase Brown. I mean, looks solid as a runner, a couple of explosive plays. And of course, him operating as a receiver out of the backfield, he got that receiving touchdown as well. So between him and Samaje Perine that we know can mix in on 3rd downs, and Perine actually got an explosive, I think around a 30-yard rushing touchdown as well in this game. It's seeing Brown being able to operate behind their offensive line, and with Joe Flacco flicking the ball out to Jamar Chase on just a ridiculous number of attempts, it does give Brown the room to move and actually create some of the space he needs in order to get going as a runner. So that's that's the only thing that really stood out, at least to me, from the Bengals offense, because the rest of it is just throw it to Jamar. Let's take a deep shot to T. Higgins every now and again, even though just 2 targets for T, which is something of a bummer. But still, it's just we'll lean on the wide receivers, and then afterwards we can then start to attack from a rushing standpoint, because they're not as defenses aren't really keying in on that part of the offense with the receivers performing so well.
No, it's a great point about Chase Brown. Another excellent game here. Samaje Perine definitely mixing in more often. And I guess you could maybe take that as bad news for Chase Brown, but at the same time, maybe it's taking some of the grinder work away from him to just let him be more efficient here. Samaje Perine averaged 2.6 touches in the first 5 games. He's gone 10, 7, 8 the last 3 games, but those have coincided with good games from Chase Brown. So I don't know whether to overreact to that, but man, you mentioned like just getting the ball to Jamar Chase. Jamar Chase has 54 targets in 3 games with Joe Flacco this year. 54 targets. That is obnoxious stuff in a game where he has 19 in this one. No one else has more than 3 here, which is Noah Fant and Chase Brown are the guys getting 3. That is where this team is right now in terms of Joe Flacco. He just knows where his bread is buttered. He's getting to that. He's getting Jamar Chase that football over and over and over again, which is great. That's good to see. And it's also making Flacco, it was a good matchup. We could have seen this one coming, but he's also a guy that you can credibly stream. Like I streamed him in one spot. He also had a 13-yard run on a 3rd and 12 where he slipped out of a tackle in addition to a sneak at the goal line. So Flacco has entered the streaming quarterback kind of conversation because he just knows Jamar Chase is really good at football, which we all do.
Oh, 100%. And next week, the Bengals play the Bears. They host them at home. So with how well the Ravens performed their passing game with Snoop Huntley under center, you could assume there's going to be a similar path for Joe Flacco to be a viable quarterback streaming option here in week 9. And I would also assume that Ben Johnson, if he has any say about how he's going to attack this Bengals defense, if Tanner Engstrom, who also, I think there's a connection between Engstrom and Ben Johnson, if memory serves, something along those lines. So if there's any type of way for the Chicago Bears offense to really get back on track, it should be against Cincinnati in Week 9.
All right, let's get to the next game that we really care about. And like I said, we're going to have to do some stretching with some of these games because there was not a lot of competitive football here in Week 8. Texans 26, 49ers 15. While this game was a little bit, back and forth in terms of not really back and forth, honestly, it was mostly Houston kind of leading on this one. There was still a lot that we learned from this game. Texans, my biggest takeaway here is I thought C.J. Stroud, Chris, was completely locked in. All right, he was dialed in for this game. He completed 14 of 15 passes for a season high, 196 yards and 2 touchdowns targeting in-breaking routes. And also, I loved the Nick Caley. I've given him a lot of crap. The whole industry has given him a lot of crap. But I thought there was some good adjustments, mostly those in-breaking routes, targeting a middle of the field for the 49ers defense that is very banged up. And Houston used 6+ offensive linemen more than any other team this season in this game, which I thought really helped the protection in the run game. So I don't know where you are with CJ Stroud, Chris. I think he is not all that much to blame for what has happened this season. He's not been blameless, but he's not one of the first problems with this offense to me. And I think he still showed today what he can do when the situation is right.
Oh, no, I wouldn't say Stroud is even in the top 5 of problems for the Texans offense as a whole, like throughout most of 2025. And even in 2024, where we started to see some of the high-end play start to fade from Stroud, I don't think it was anything that we could attribute to him. It was more about just everything else kind of crumbling around him, whether it was the offensive line, whether it was the loss of Tank Dell and really just relying on Nico Collins, who is more of your boundary or your prototypical X receiver and not having much around him. I think that really started to shine towards the back end of 2024. And speaking of that, you mentioned earlier how locked in Stroud was in this game. 0 sacks today for CJ Stroud. The last time that CJ Stroud was not taken to the ground by the opposing defense, you have to go all the way back to Week 5 of 2023 in order to see that type of performance from him.
Wow.
That's how long it's been since the offensive line and also the offense has been working in tandem enough for him to stay upright throughout this game. And it's also his first passing game over 300 yards since last year. Since Week 5 of 2024. So this is what I'm talking about, where it's like I cannot attribute any of the systemic issues with the Texans offense with CJ Stroud. It really just has been about the infrastructure that the Texans have put around him.
Yeah, and like I said, he's not blameless. I think there have been times where bad habits have crept into his game, but you almost can't blame him because of the carnage that he has had to play through so far, especially these last 12 months or so have just been really, really poor for this team. But this was a game here where there was even times, Chris, where there were free rushers. He was under pressure, and I think he responded well to it. He scrambled a couple of times in this game. He ended the day with 7 carries for 30 yards, 13-yard long run. There were times where he was just decisive, which I always think Stroud just should run a little bit more, because I think he's got that in his bag. Not like he's going to be a, Justin Fields or Lamar Jackson or something like that, but he's got an ability to run a little bit and just keep the offense moving. I liked that response. I also thought there were several times where he would make a move under pressure and there would actually be an answer in the short area, whether it was dump the ball off to Dalton Schultz, dump the ball off to Woody Marks as a receiver. I thought that was really good to see from Nick Caley. Again, I want to give Nick Caley some props here because I've given him so much heat. And I'm going to give him a slight bit of heat here in just a second. But for the most part, I think we saw some nice changes from this Houston offense that I'd love to see moving forward. CJ Stroud completed 7 of 9 passes under pressure for 111 yards with a touchdown while taking no sacks today, as we're showing on the screen. So that was really, really an encouraging performance from Stroud. Love to see that. Like I said, though, this is a very, very banged up 49ers defense. So I do want to kind of caution people extrapolating too much, but I do also think that we saw some systemic changes here from Houston that could propel them forward. Let's talk about some of these other young players that got involved here. Let's start with the passing game. The route participation numbers go as followed for Houston pass catchers. Jaden Higgins leads the way with 81. percent route participation. Dalton Schultz was 79%. Xavier Hutchinson 79%. Jalen Knoll 45%. Woody Marks 41%. Braxton Berrios 38%. Berrios got banged up a little bit later in the game, but man, it was still driving me crazy. Like, not enough Jalen Knoll, and this guy just makes plays every single time you throw him the football. It was driving me crazy. We just did not get enough Jalen Knoll in this game, but at least it was a little bit of a step forward in terms of from a production standpoint.
Yeah, and kind of to your point, I wonder if for the Houston Texans offense, if it's more of the, what's the phrase, necessity is the mother of invention, where is if you remove Nico Collins, a guy that demands targets given his skill and efficiency once you get the ball in his hands, but the where he plays makes it a bit more volatile. But now if you remove that from the offense for this game because of his concussion, now you have all these other guys that can really win on some of those in-breaking routes, kind of to your point. And also if Stroud needs some of those short area dump off targets, you have a guy like Jaden Higgins or Jalen Noel, or you have a guy like Dalton Schultz, or even Woody Marks, who mixed in for about 10 to 11% of the team's targets and had about a 50-yard explosive on a swing pass from Stroud. That's where, again, Nick Caley not having that guy where it's just, all right, Stroud's in trouble, give it to Nico Collins. Or even Stroud himself when he's like, well, I'm under pressure. Collins is down there somewhere, and I'm going to lob it down the field. Yeah. That's where having to change some of the way that he was going to approach dealing with pressure and dealing with defenders in his face and having those other guys that can work the short and intermediate parts of the field. That's that systemic change that I think that you're pointing to that could be at least beneficial to both him and Caley as they move forward in the season.
Yeah, because Nico's drawing all of those true brackets and double covers and stuff like that, which makes sense because he lines up only at X. They don't move him around a lot, and none of these other guys are established NFL players. If we can start to just kind of, again, mix and match some of these players, because Jaden Higgins, for the most part, ran out as an X receiver in this game, although his one touchdown reception, he led the team in targets with 8. He only caught 4 of those for 34 yards and 1 touchdown, but the touchdown came on a play where he was lined up in the slot where they motioned him from one side of the field to the other. That was nice to see. That's how you lean into the best of Jaden Higgins' skill set. So again, don't want to extrapolate too much from Houston's side of this from a passing game standpoint because of the matchup, but nevertheless encouraging to see. Also encouraging to see while Woody Marks was behind Nick Chubb in terms of snaps or in terms of touches, 53% of the touches for Nick Chubb, 42% for Woody Marks. Marks was much more productive. He ran 17 routes to 9 for Chubb. Again, I think we're figuring out a little bit of these personnel questions that have been haunting Houston so far this year.
Yeah, and Marks was the more efficient of the two runners, a 54% rushing success rate compared to around 40% for Nick Chubb. So you can see just the level of explosivity that Marks has. I mean, it's the younger, fresh legs type of deal with Woody Marks coming into it. Whereas Nick Chubb, if you need 3 yards, yeah, maybe Nick Chubb will get you to 3 yards. You need 4 yards, maybe. Depends on how the offensive line is looking on that particular play and how many men are in the box. It's that type of thing where Chubb is at in his career. So there's no knock against him. It's just, will you have the right offensive game environment, like in this case, facing the 49ers with their Fred Warner-less and Bosa-less type defense that will allow a guy like Marks to really take advantage of it? In this case, yes. But moving forward in the weeks to come for the Texans offense, it might not be the case. So yeah, I'm with you that Marks is kind of that probably sitting in that RB3 type range that unless we really start to see a separation between the two RBs or the offensive environment really is conducive to that type of production, I really think Marks is kind of a flex play at best for right now.
On the 49ers side of things, sometimes a game goes exactly to your worst fears. And for me, my concern with Mac Jones in this game was just the pressure he was going to face. Highlighted this on the Fantasy Film Room episode with Nate Tice earlier this week, that Mac Jones is one of these quarterbacks who, when he's not under pressure, the results are really good. When he's under pressure, he becomes one of the least effective quarterbacks in the league. According to NFL Pro here, despite only taking 1 sack against the Texans, Mac Jones was pressured on 50% of his dropbacks in this game. And when he was under pressure, Jones completed just 4 of 13 passes for 64 yards with an interception. When he wasn't under pressure, much more effective, 15 of 19 for 129 yards and 2 touchdowns. So that's ultimately, to me, Chris, the story of this game, that the 49ers passing offense was never able to find a rhythm because we know they're banged up in the receiver room, and then you have just this offensive line going against a Texans defensive line that can just make a quarterback's life hell, and a quarterback who's very sensitive to that pressure.
Yeah, and it also didn't help that, I mean, a few brutal drops like from the 49ers pass catching core. Jennings had a drop on first down. I think that was in the first half. Kendrick Bourne also got a drop. And then Jordan Watkins, who's rotated in now with some of the injuries there, had also a terrible drop on third down, which could have extended their drive. So I think that's where you just have a lot of those things that nothing's really going your way. If Mac Jones is not playing well, not playing well because of the amount of pressure, you also have these drops. And also, I mean, Christian McCaffrey, no touches in the first quarter, which was also kind of bizarre, not really seeing him getting involved as we expected. So it just seemed like just a cavalcade of issues for the 49ers offense in this one. So throwaway game for them. This is the types of games that could potentially happen for them, and they should be able to get right after in the next game.
At least George Kittle got into the end zone on National Tight Ends Day, and his understudy, Jake Tonjes, also found his way into the end zone, so there was that. So the Niners sound like they are considering opening Brandon Ayuk's 21-day practice window this week. Ricky Pearsall, we know, is still due to come back at some point. I know this is like a weekly theme with the Niners, but hopefully we see them healthier at some point. Brock Purdy, he's kind of on my radar, the whole toe injury that he's dealing with right now. Will he, won't he play? I don't know. So hopefully we see the Niners a little bit more fully stocked when they go against some of these good defenses going forward.